The unnameable location. There are places people fear because they are dangerous. Cliffs that collapse, waters that pull you under, regions marked in red on official maps. And then there are places people fear for a different reason, because they cannot remember them. The unnameable location does not announce itself. There are no warning signs, no borders, no sudden shift in the landscape that tells you you've crossed into something unusual. People who pass through it report that everything feels ordinary in the moment. The air behaves normally. Time moves forward. Nothing feels hostile. It is only afterward that something goes wrong. When asked where they have been, survivors hesitate, not because they are hiding something, but because the answer simply isn't there. They remember traveling. They remember deciding to turn back. They remember the feeling of leaving, but the place itself refuses to take shape in their minds. Ask them to describe the ground, and they pause. Ask them about buildings or trees or sounds, and their sentences trail off. It is not confusion, it is absence. Some describe it as trying to remember a dream that never fully formed. Others say it feels like a word on the tip of the tongue that disappears the moment you reach for it. The harder they try to recall details, the more uncomfortable they become, as if their mind is quietly pushing back. What makes this place unsettling is not what happens there, but what doesn't stay. Photographs taken near the area exist, but refuse to cooperate. Files open normally, timestamps remain intact, yet the images appear subtly wrong. Lines bend. Focus collapses toward a central emptiness. In some cases, the image looks complete at first glance, until you realize there is nothing to look at. Not a blur, not darkness, just a space that feels intentionally blank. Mapping software offers no clarity. Coordinates entered manually vanish moments later. Saved pins delete themselves without error messages. Offline maps reload as if the location was never requested at all. Even system logs struggle to explain it, often marking the deletion with vague phrases like location invalid or data unavailable, as if the concept itself refuses to be stored. This has led some researchers to propose a disturbing idea that the location is not broken, cursed, or malfunctioning, but functional, that it is behaving exactly as intended. If a place could cause harm simply by being remembered, then forgetting would not be a flaw. It would be protection. Perhaps the unnameable location does not erase itself to hide. Perhaps it erases itself so that you can leave and continue living without carrying what you were never meant to keep. People who came back empty. The first accounts did not sound alarming. They were easy to dismiss. Half-finished travel stories, vague recollections, people struggling to explain where they had gone. At first, no one suspected anything unusual. Memory fails all the time. People forget details. Places blur together. But a pattern began to form. Those who returned from certain remote regions could recount their journeys with unsettling precision, up to a point. They remembered the roads they took, the weather that day, the reason for the trip. They remembered deciding to move forward, and later deciding to leave. What they could not remember was the place itself. When asked simple questions, their confidence vanished. What did it look like? How long were you there? What made you turn back? Their answers stalled mid-sentence, as if language itself had hit a wall. Not panic, not distress, just a sudden, unmistakable emptiness. Some tried to laugh it off. Others grew visibly frustrated. A few became quiet, withdrawn, staring at nothing as if something had slipped away while they weren't looking. Medical evaluations revealed nothing conclusive. No signs of trauma, no neurological damage. Memory tests showed normal recall in every other area of their lives. Childhood details, faces, technical skills, all intact. Only one category failed: location-based memory tied to a specific stretch of space. Several individuals described the same sensation, the certainty that something important had happened, paired with the complete inability to access it. Not repression, not denial. It felt more like a locked room, except they could no longer remember what was inside, only that the door had once been open. One hiker described it as coming back with a suitcase that weighs nothing. He knew he had carried something out. He remembered the effort, the weight, but when he opened it later, it was empty. And worse, he could no longer explain what had been inside in the first place. Another subject said the memory loss didn't feel violent. It felt precise. "There's no damage," she explained. "It's like the memory was never written, like someone removed a paragraph from a book and smoothed the page so well you can't even see where it was." What troubled researchers most was the emotional consistency. People did not return terrified. They did not report visions or threats. They did not describe being chased or harmed. Instead, they returned subdued, quiet, thoughtful, sometimes relieved without knowing why. A few admitted that when they stopped trying to remember, a sense of calm settled in, as if the act of forgetting was not forced but encouraged. Attempts to recover the missing memories consistently failed. Hypnosis produced fragments that collapsed under scrutiny. Guided recall sessions resulted in headaches, nausea, or sudden fatigue. One subject began crying without understanding why, repeating only a single phrase, "I don't think we're supposed to hold it." That sentence appeared again and again across unrelated interviews. As weeks passed, something else became apparent. People who returned empty changed. Subtly, but measurably. They avoided unnecessary travel. They became cautious around unfamiliar places. Several developed an intense discomfort with maps, especially digital ones. One former surveyor quit his job entirely, unable to explain why staring at coordinates made his chest tighten. And yet, none of them expressed regret. Not a single subject asked to go back. When presented with the possibility of returning to the location, every individual refused, often before the question was fully asked. Their refusals were immediate, instinctive, and emotionally charged, as if some part of them still understood the risk, even if the memory was gone. "It took something from me," one man said quietly, "but I think it took the right thing." That statement unsettled investigators more than any missing detail, because it suggested intent. Not the intent of the people who went there, but the intent of the place itself. If these individuals truly came back empty, the question is not what they lost. The question is, what would have happened if they had come back full? The photographs that refused to show it. When memory failed, people turned to evidence. Cameras do not forget. They do not feel fear or confusion. They capture light, record time, and preserve moments exactly as they occur. If something had been there, truly there, the lens should have seen it. At least, that was the assumption. The first photographs appeared ordinary at a glance. Landscapes, roads, open terrain, files opened without error, metadata intact, timestamps correct. There was no indication of corruption or tampering. Yet viewers reported an immediate sense that something was wrong, not broken, but incomplete. The distortion was subtle. Horizons bent in ways that did not match the terrain. Perspective lines drifted, as if the geometry of the scene had been gently pulled out of alignment. In some images, the focus seemed to collapse toward a central area, leaving the edges unusually sharp while the middle softened into an indistinct haze. Not a blur, not motion, an absence of definition. Photographers initially blamed equipment failure, faulty lenses, heat distortion, compression artifacts. But the anomalies appeared across devices from different manufacturers using different sensors, settings, and storage media. Analog film showed it, digital cameras showed it. Even single-frame extractions from video exhibited the same behavior. More troubling was the consistency. In every image, the distortion centered on the same region of space. No matter where the photographer stood, no matter how they framed the shot, the image seemed to bend around something that refused to be rendered. The camera recorded what surrounded it, sky, ground, distant features, but the center remained strangely neutral, as if the scene had been edited without leaving a trace. Some images appeared normal until examined closely. Viewers described a delayed realization, the moment when the brain understands that it has been looking at something without actually seeing anything at all. A space that draws the eye while offering nothing in return. Attempts to enhance the photographs made the problem worse. Increasing contrast introduced artifacts that did not correspond to any known optical phenomenon. Sharpening algorithms amplified noise that behaved inconsistently with sensor data. When AI-based upscaling was applied, the software hallucinated structures that changed with each pass, buildings appearing, then dissolving, replaced by textures that made no physical sense. It was as if the system could not agree on what should be there. In one controlled test, researchers fed the same image into 3 separate enhancement models. Each produced a different interpretation of the empty region. One suggested foliage, another suggested architecture. The third generated shapes that analysts could not categorize at all. The models were not failing randomly. They were guessing, and none of them guessed the same thing twice. Perhaps most disturbing were the photographs that appeared to change over time. Not dramatically, not enough to be called movement, but enough that when images were compared months later, subtle differences emerged. Edges shifted, grain patterns reorganized. In some cases, the central void appeared slightly larger or slightly smaller, with no clear explanation. Digital forensic analysis found no signs of file alteration, no edits, no overwrites, no access logs. The files were static. Only the perception of them changed. Several photographers reported physical reactions while reviewing their own work. Headaches, eye strain, a sense of pressure behind the eyes. One described feeling like the image was looking back, not at me, but past me. Another refused to keep the photographs, deleting every copy, despite knowing there was no logical reason to do so. When asked why, he struggled to explain. "They're not dangerous," he said. "They're unfinished." The most revealing detail came from an experiment designed to remove human interpretation altogether. A simple program was written to analyze pixel density and edge detection across the images. The results were unexpected. The central region contained data, color values, luminance, noise, but none of it resolved into meaningful structure. Statistically, it behaved less like a photograph and more like an intentional placeholder. Not emptiness. Reservation, as if the image was acknowledging something should be there, while actively refusing to decide what that something was. This led to a chilling conclusion. The photographs were not failing to capture the place. They were complying with it, recording everything they were allowed to see and nothing they weren't. And if a camera, a machine designed to observe without judgment, could be made to look away, then whatever occupied that space was not merely unseen. It was unshowable. The map that erased itself. When photographs failed to reveal the place, investigators turned to maps. Maps are not memories. They do not interpret or imagine. They reduce the world to coordinates, vectors, and reference points, systems designed to be indifferent to mystery. If a location existed in physical space, it should exist on a map. At first, it seemed to. Coordinates provided by travelers led to plausible regions, remote terrain, lightly documented roads, areas with limited satellite coverage. Nothing unusual appeared at standard zoom levels. The land looked ordinary, continuous, measurable. But the problems began when those coordinates were saved. Pins dropped manually would vanish within seconds. Named locations reverted to blank entries. Offline maps refreshed themselves, quietly removing any trace that a request had ever been made. No error messages appeared. No warnings were issued. The system behaved as if it had corrected a mistake. Digital cartography specialists initially suspected synchronization conflicts or database permissions, but the phenomenon persisted across platforms, devices, and operating systems. Commercial mapping services, open source projects, even custom-built GIS software all exhibited the same behavior. The location could be viewed. Briefly, it could not be kept. Some systems logged the deletion process, though the logs themselves were inconsistent. In several cases, the reason field contained vague system language, location invalid, reference unresolved, or simply no longer applicable. One internal log recorded a more unsettling phrase: coordinate does not converge. Satellite imagery offered no clarity. At wide zoom levels, the region appeared intact: forests, roads, terrain shadows consistent with neighboring areas. But as analysts zoomed closer, the image softened. Details failed to resolve. The tile reloaded. Zooming again produced the same result. Not pixelation, not blur. Reset. It was as if the map had a limit and crossing it triggered a quiet refusal. In some instances, users reported that the map interface itself behaved differently near the area. Panning slowed. Labels flickered. Compass orientation drifted by a fraction of a degree before snapping back. None of these anomalies were severe enough to trigger system alerts, yet they appeared repeatedly in usage logs. The map was not broken. It was cautious. Attempts to bypass commercial services with raw satellite data yielded similar results. Coordinates plotted correctly in isolation, but failed to integrate into larger reference systems. When layered with known landmarks, the data refused alignment. Roads that should intersect did not. Distances calculated from surrounding points produced contradictory measurements. The space resisted being anchored. One cartographer described the sensation as trying to pin a shadow to the ground. Historical maps provided no refuge. Archival charts showed inconsistencies where the location should have been. Older documents displayed faint gaps, regions with fewer markings, vague labels, or unusual blankness that could not be explained by lack of exploration alone. In one 19th century survey, a note appeared in the margin near the relevant area: terrain uncertain, readings unreliable. No explanation followed. The most troubling discovery came from automated correction systems. Modern mapping platforms use algorithms to resolve discrepancies, filling gaps with inferred data based on surrounding patterns. When applied to this region, the system repeatedly attempted reconstruction and then removed its own output. The algorithm recognized the inconsistency and then rejected itself. Engineers reviewing the process found no explicit rule instructing the deletion. The system had concluded through pattern recognition alone that the data did not belong. That conclusion forced a disturbing possibility. Maps do not choose what exists. They reflect consensus. And consensus requires agreement between measurements, observations, and references across time. If this location cannot be stabilized within that agreement, then it may not exist in the way maps require. Not as a point, not as a region, not as a destination. Perhaps it exists only while unrecorded. Perhaps the act of mapping is what causes it to disappear. If so, then the question is no longer why the map erased the place. The question is whether the place ever allowed itself to be found at all. The theory no one likes. For a long time, no one wanted to give the idea a name. Researchers prefer explanations that can be measured, tested, and safely debated. And at first, there were plenty of comfortable theories to choose from: neurological stress responses, collective misremembering, environmental factors affecting perception and memory. Each explanation stayed within familiar boundaries. None of them held. Medical examinations showed no signs of injury. Brain scans revealed nothing resembling trauma. Psychological assessments produced no consistent diagnosis. The people who returned were stable, coherent, and fully capable of remembering everything else in their lives. Only one thing was missing: the place. When conventional theories began to collapse, a different line of thinking emerged, quietly and mostly off the record. It was discussed in private emails, late-night conversations, and margins of unpublished reports. No one wanted to be publicly associated with it because it implied intent. The theory suggested that the location was not malfunctioning, cursed, or anomalous in the usual sense. It was functional, purpose-built, behaving exactly as designed. According to this idea, the erasure was not a side effect. It was the mechanism. If the human mind has limits, thresholds beyond which perception becomes harmful, then something that consistently removes itself from memory might not be hostile at all. It might be adaptive. Protection does not always feel gentle. Sometimes it feels like loss. Supporters of the theory pointed to the precision of the phenomenon. Memories were not scrambled, they were absent. Photographs were not corrupted, they were selectively incomplete. Maps did not display errors, they corrected themselves. Every system involved behaved as if it had encountered something incompatible and responded by refusing to retain it. The most unsettling implication was that the erasure appeared to happen after exposure, not before. People could enter the location. Cameras could record light, satellites could pass overhead, but nothing could leave carrying a stable representation of it. That distinction mattered. It suggested that the place did not need to hide. It allowed contact. It allowed observation. What it did not allow was permanence. Critics dismissed the theory as anthropomorphic, assigning intention to a non-sentient environment. They argued that humans are pattern-seeking, prone to inventing purpose where none exists. Yet those critics struggled to explain one detail. Everyone who returned seemed to accept the loss, not immediately. not consciously, but over time, a consensus formed among the affected individuals. Whatever had been taken, it should stay gone. No one demanded answers. No one pushed for recovery. No one tried to reconstruct the missing memory at all costs. They moved on. One researcher described it as a quiet agreement between the place and the people who passed through it, a transaction completed without negotiation or resentment. Another proposed a more disturbing version of the theory. What if the erasure was not protecting humans from the place, but protecting the place from humans? Maps fix things in space, photographs fix them in time, memory fixes them in meaning. To exist fully in the human world is to be recorded, named, categorized, and eventually exploited. Perhaps the location resisted not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. If that were true, then the emptiness left behind was not damage, it was a boundary. The theory reached its most controversial form when someone asked a question no one wanted to answer. What if forgetting is the cost of survival? Not survival of the people who visit, but survival of whatever exists there. If a place can only remain intact by remaining unremembered, then erasing itself would be the only option. And if human minds cannot distinguish between protection and loss, the process would feel unsettling by design. The reason no one likes this theory is simple. It suggests that the world contains things that are not meant to be understood, not because we lack the tools, but because understanding itself would be harmful. Not everything that exists wants to be known, and not everything that erases itself is disappearing. Some things forget us first, so that both sides can continue to exist. The last recorded sentence. There is only one written record that comes directly from someone who entered the location and chose to speak afterward, not in interviews, not in reports, but in their own words. It is not a description. It does not contain coordinates, measurements, or sensory detail. There are no sketches, no diagrams, no attempts to capture what was seen. In fact, the note offers almost nothing that investigators could analyze, except for a single sentence. The document itself is unremarkable, a small, weathered notebook recovered weeks after the individual returned. The pages contain ordinary observations at first, travel notes, dates, fragments of routine thoughts. Nothing suggests the writer expected anything unusual. Then, halfway through the notebook, the tone changes. The handwriting grows heavier, pressed deeper into the page, as if the writer was struggling to anchor something before it slipped away. Margins fill with repetition. Lines are rewritten, crossed out, then written again with slight variations, none of them more detailed than the last. Every attempt at explanation fails, until only one sentence remains. It appears first in the margin, then at the bottom of the page, then again on the following pages, as though the writer feared losing it even as they wrote it. If something erases itself, maybe it's not trying to disappear. Maybe it's trying to let you leave. There is no context, no explanation of what prompted the thought, no indication of when it was written, whether immediately after leaving the location or days later during the slow realization that something was missing. The sentence simply exists, repeated until the notebook ends. When asked about it later, the writer refused to elaborate. They did not deny its importance, nor did they claim to fully understand it themselves. They only confirmed one thing, that the sentence felt complete. Attempts to extract more information were unsuccessful. Questions about what had been erased led nowhere. The writer grew visibly uncomfortable when pressed, not afraid, but resolute, as if crossing a line they had already agreed not to cross. What unsettled investigators was how often that sentence resonated with others. When shown to people who had returned from the same region, many reacted instantly. Some nodded. Some closed their eyes. A few became emotional without knowing why. None of them asked for clarification. They recognized the meaning without being able to explain it. Over time, the sentence took on a quiet authority. It appeared in internal reports, quoted cautiously, often without attribution. Not because it was considered evidence, but because it explained something that data could not. It reframed the phenomenon. Erasure was no longer interpreted as loss. Silence was no longer seen as failure. Absence became intentional. The sentence suggested a choice, not on the part of the visitors, but on the part of the place. Leaving, in this context, was not merely physical. It meant departing without being followed, without carrying something that would continue to exert pressure on the mind long after the journey ended. Perhaps the place understood something about human cognition that humans themselves did not. That memory is not neutral, that certain experiences, once retained, cannot be safely integrated. If that is true, then forgetting is not a weakness, it is a release. The notebook ends without a signature, without a conclusion. There is no final warning, no attempt to convince the reader of anything. Just the same sentence, written one last time, smaller than before, almost tentative, as if it was being set down rather than recorded. It is the last thing the writer allowed themselves to keep. And maybe that, more than anything else, is why it was allowed to remain. What you won't remember either. If this place exists, you will not find it by searching. Not on a map, not in an archive, not by following coordinates passed quietly between people who think they remember more than they do. Discovery implies permanence, and permanence is exactly what this place does not allow. If you ever pass through it, the moment will feel ordinary. There will be no signal telling you to stop, no sensation of crossing a boundary. You will continue moving, breathing, thinking, unaware that anything has changed. Only later will the absence reveal itself. You will remember leaving. You will remember returning. You will remember the certainty that something mattered, but the shape of it will be gone. And when you notice the gap, you will not panic. You will not feel chased or violated. At most, there will be a quiet pressure, the sense that reaching for the memory would be a mistake, like pressing on a bruise that has already begun to heal. You will let it go. That is the part no one talks about. Forgetting will not feel like defeat. It will feel like permission. You will stop asking questions you can't answer. You will stop searching for proof that refuses to exist. The world will return to its familiar edges, and you will move forward carrying less than before, lighter, but not empty. Whatever you were never meant to keep will remain where it belongs. And if one day you come across a story like this one and feel a strange sense of recognition, a pause you can't explain, a sentence that feels already understood, do not try to trace it back. Recognition does not mean memory. Some things leave impressions without leaving evidence. Some experiences pass through us and take their meaning with them when they go. If the place truly exists, then this will be the final truth you won't remember. Not everything that disappears is lost. Some things vanish so that you can continue, untouched by what you were never meant to carry.
Share